Good morning everyone and welcome to the webinar on 6 Habits of Successful Speakers. So Peter Dew is my name. Most of you know I'm a public speaking trainer and coach, and I'm also a person who stutters, and I use my story and my experience around my inability and my fear of public speaking to show people that you can be a great public speaker. You can share your message and your passion. This webinar just came about from me looking at lots of good speakers around the world and live speakers that I've attended, and the ones that the audience thinks, wow, that was really good. I noticed the common habits that they do, and I thought I would share them with you. So that's the genesis of this webinar. How to participate, just for those of you who are new, please take notes, ask questions, write comments into the Q&A box, and apply the thinking or the tools I'm going to share with you to your own personal circumstances. And the best way to do that is to reflect on a recent presentation, a recent meeting or facilitation that you've done, or reflect on one that's coming up, one you're planning to do in the near future. Is there anything you'll change, anything you'll include, anything you'll delete as a result of what I've shared with you today? So it's about taking something from this webinar, not just investing your time and listening and then doing nothing. Try and grab one or two what I call nuggets or gems. And I'll pause every now and then for questions, but don't wait for me to pause to write your comments or your questions in. Let's get started. So 6 tips and 1 bonus tip. The first tip of successful speakers is around the level of preparation they do. They do exceptional preparation, and it's not just practicing their speech and rewriting a script. It's around knowing their audience, who's in the room, the cultural nuances of the people in the room, the breakup, male to female. Do you need to acknowledge the traditional landowners? When I go to Bendigo, I need to acknowledge the Dja Dja Wurrung people. When I go to Swan Hill, it's the Wamba Wamba people. When I go to Shepparton, it's the Yorta Yorta people. Here in Perth, it's the Noongar nation in the southwest. Specifically in Perth, it's the Wadjuk people, which is a subgroup of the Noongar. So that's about knowing who's in the room. Know your topic so that when people ask you difficult questions, left field questions, niche questions, you can answer them. In fact, anticipate the difficult questions and know the issues and the emotions of your audience around your topic. Are you delivering bad news? Are you downsizing? Are you reducing budgets? Are you removing services to your community? Put yourself in your audience's footsteps and you will know the questions they're going to ask you. So this is about preparation, not just having a script and fancy PowerPoint slides. This is about going deeper. Know your venue. Do you need a microphone? If you're going to get a microphone, what kind of microphone? Is it a handheld microphone? Is it a lapel microphone? Is it anchored to the lectern, therefore you're trapped behind the lectern when you speak? It's best to know all of that beforehand. Is the lighting going to be okay? Really, the more you know about your audience, your venue, and your topic, the more confident you can be within yourself and the more confident you will portray to your audience. The audience wants to see a confident speaker. They don't want to see a perfect speaker. They don't want to see a polished plum in your mouth speaker. They want to see a confident speaker that knows what they're talking about and who's there presenting for them. So that's the level of preparation I do. You can have a checklist. If anyone wants a checklist, I have a fairly extensive 2-page checklist that I go through before I take on a gig, before I run a workshop. And that goes down to the level of the catering, the sound system, will there be an audio visual person there? How early can I get access to the room so I can familiarize myself with the space? All of that is around my level of preparation. The second thing you'll notice with great speakers is they tend to not read from a script. It's called speaking extemporaneously, and extemporaneously is not spontaneously. It's not like they're standing up and doing an off-the-cuff and impromptu speech. That's a different skill. But they know their stuff so well that they don't need notes. When you read from a script, it's really hard to be present and engage with the audience. One of the most important skills that you can have as a speaker is really good peripheral vision. Peripheral vision that reads what's happening in the room. So in terms of eye contact, I will speak one-on-one to the people in the room, all 150 of them. So I'll give people a turn to speak to them for a few seconds and I'll move randomly to someone else. But the peripheral vision's picking up what's happening in the room. And if you're using a notes or script, it's really hard to pick up the energy level in the room. Peripheral vision lets you know when people are disagreeing with you, when they're falling asleep, when they're shocked, you know, when they sit back in the seat and they stop breathing, when you've said something contentious. And if it was deliberately contentious, you expect that physiological reaction. If you weren't deliberately trying to shock them and they give you that sign of shock, you need to pick that up and maybe step back, change pace. This is speaking extemporaneously and not reading from a script. Now, I do understand you may have some data, a famous quote, some statistics that you just cannot remember. Feel free to move back to your notes and refer to them. And I would start with a story, engage, let people know why they're there, how I'm going to help them. Maybe there's some compelling data. Just let me read out this compelling data. You know, 1 in 5 Australians will suffer from mental ill health at some stage during their life. If I can't remember that, then I would go to my notes. So while I say speak extemporaneously without notes, I'm not saying don't have notes, and you can put your notes on a table or off to the side to the lectern. Make sure they're 14-point font, generally all caps, and then 1.5 to double spacing. So if you do need to refer to something, you can find it easily, and you can underline or bold that stuff that you know is going to be more important to you, so that when you're looking for that data, you go to your script and it sort of pops and you can see it. Whereas if you just have 12-point font and lots of lines, you won't be able to find it. And also if you get really nervous or you get hit by stage fright, you've got your notes to go there and go back to. But just bearing in mind, we're talking about what is it those speakers that do really well do? They don't read from their notes. Takes practice, takes courage. Leave your notes down, start off without your notes. You can always go back to your notes if you need to. Another way, of course, is using a one-page mind map or a one-page bullet points as your reference to go back to. Those of you who are interested in speaking without notes, I did a newsletter 2 editions ago on speaking without notes. If you haven't subscribed to my newsletter, feel free to subscribe on my website or send me an email and I can send you, and then ask me to send you the past edition of my newsletter. They always put the audience first. This is what great speakers do. Polished professional speakers can nail their presentation and have no impact on the audience, and they think they've done a great job and the audience walks out and says, well, what was that about? So why does the audience care about your topic? What's in it for me? What's in it for me? One way of conceptualizing this is think of yourself as an aspirin or a Panadol. What headache are you going to remove for the people in the room? Always put the audience first. Public speaking is not about you. And this is a really great concept when I talk about overcoming your fear of public speaking and being confident and not being confident. They're those speakers that are absolutely confident, no nerves. They stand there and they hit you with verbal diarrhea and they walk out and they think, wow, that was 100% perfect. Not one slip up. My words came out absolutely beautiful. And the audience thinks that you sucked. Then there's the other speaker who's dying in their boots. They're nervous, they shake, and they're not enjoying the experience, and the audience hears their message and walks out and thinks, wow, I wish that I knew that 12 months ago, or I can now use this to move forward. I see light at the end of the tunnel. If this person can succeed in overcoming whatever adversity they were speaking about. So really the audience determines whether you've done a good job or not. And successful speakers put the audience first. And when you tell your stories, and I see some athletes and some champions and some people that have survived really tough adversity, and they make the story all about them, and we think, wow, that's fantastic, you're a fantastic hero, and we walk out and once again there's nothing in it for us. So even though you tell those fantastic stories, and when I talk about overcoming my stutter, it's about my audience overcoming their fear of public speaking. And if I can help everyone in the room be more confident and deal with fear or nerves around public speaking, then that's my job. So my story is about making you the hero. I don't want you to think about me and how I overcome my stutter. I just use that to illustrate that anyone can become successful. So it's about empowering your audience. This is what great speakers do. The audience is why you're speaking. We use a saying in the public speaking world, public speaking is not about you. It's about the audience. Great speakers always put their audience first. Just pause for a moment and I'm going to have a quick drink. Any questions at this stage? Any other traits you've seen before I reveal the last three that I commonly see that you notice in great speakers? What do you think helps someone be seen as successful and effective as a speaker? They know their content really well. They do use stories, yes. So thanks for that, Stephen. Yeah, great speakers use stories, and I'm not going to talk about stories in this webinar. I do have a webinar on business storytelling. Humour, yes. There are those great speakers who use humour, and the type of humour they tend to use is self-deprecating humour, and often it's about situations they've found themselves in which turn out to be humorous, and there's a lesson in the humour. And if you can get the audience on side with humour, and there's a point in the joke or the humour you're using, a point that's relevant to the audience, then the very laughter, the audience is endorsing your point. That's kind of a paraphrase from John Cleese. Humour is a great way of connecting with the audience. Please test your humour, try something, and then get feedback as to how it works, and then you need to practice and practice and polish that humour. I am not very good at humour. Unfortunately, I'm not a funny person. You see the really motivational, the engaging speakers, and they have the courage to move away from the lectern or the table. They don't put barriers between themselves and the audience. When you stand behind the lectern for your whole presentation, you're kind of saying, I'm not prepared to take the risk of coming out and sharing 100% of myself with you. When you come away and have no barriers between us, we are metaphorically exposed. You can see my bald head, my big nose, my pimples, my big ears, my warts. You see all of me. And what I'm saying in doing that is I'm prepared to take the risk to come out and give you 100% of myself. When I kind of stand behind the lectern, I'm just not prepared to take the risk. Now, it does take courage to get out from behind the lectern. Now, some people say to me, but I'm using PowerPoint, and if I stand out in the middle of the room, then I'm going to block the PowerPoint. Yes, that is true. You can bring the PowerPoint slide down before you walk out into the middle of the room, and you do that quite simply. You will have heard me say this before, by hitting the B for black key on your keyboard. This is in presentation mode, not in sorting mode, or when you're writing your PowerPoint slides. Works for Keynote as well. So I'll just do that momentarily. So I'm standing behind the lectern like the person on the right. I'm now going to hit B. You should be looking at a black screen. So I'm now standing in the middle of the room. The data projector is not making puppet shadows. I want it back. I just hit B. I can now go back to the side of the room, and doesn't have to be behind the lectern. I could go to the other side where the flip chart is. So I generally have a flip chart and a whiteboard on opposite sides of the room. The data projector's bang in the middle on a white wall or the screen that comes down, and I'll move from left to right, and I won't stand behind a lectern. Remember in preparation I said no about the microphone, so clearly on the right this lady must stand behind the lectern because it's a microphone that is anchored into the lectern. So ideally have a lapel or a hands-free microphone, the Madonna microphone that the singers use, or one that's attached to your collar, or even a handheld microphone allows you to move out. But that's how you really engage your audience, by leaving the lectern and coming out in the middle and showing that you really have the courage and you care about the audience. You can have your notes on the lectern, so when you want to remember that quote or that statistic, you can move back behind the lectern, check your notes, and deliver that content behind the lectern, but just don't stand for the entire presentation behind a barrier. The successful speakers, great speakers, they are passionate and excited to be there. They're pleased to be there. It's the right space to be. They want to be there. They want to be with you. Sometimes when you're doing tough gigs, maybe speaking to year 11, year 12 high school kids, 16, 17-year-olds, and the kids don't want to be in the room, and you're talking about first aid or Red Cross blood donation or something like that, drug and alcohol addiction, and they're a captive audience and they don't want to be there, and they're a really tough gig, and you're doing it just because it's part of your job. You go there, you go through the motions, tick the box. Yep, I've presented at that school. Successful speakers, great speakers, people that have impact don't do that. The passion needs to come through, and you need to have to come there with the attitude that right now, the only place in the world that I want to be is in front of this room for these group of 12-year-olds. The only place I want to be is at this aged care facility in front of these group of residents that just want to know some information around their options, around wills, around estate planning, their options around aged care. You need to want to be there. Right now, I need to exude that I want to be here. Now, it's not faking that I want to be here. It needs to be genuine, and you need to be excited to be in that place. So you need to tap into that internal source of passion and excitement for this audience, even with the tough gigs, even with the gigs where you're delivering bad news and the audience may not want to be there. Great speakers seem to be able to have that passion. And I guess the question comes, if your job is such that you need to go out and give a message that you are not passionate about, maybe you're not the right person, which moves me on to the sixth tip. It's about the conviction. So if you don't believe in your message, Let's say Human Resources comes to you and rolls out a new policy, and you're thinking as a manager, this policy does not make sense. It's going to be really hard for me to implement and to manage. I'm going to get pushback from staff, and I really don't understand the rationale for doing it. But my job is now to go and have a staff meeting tomorrow morning and present this new policy. It's going to be really hard to sell that policy to your staff if you yourself do not believe 100% in your own message, in your own point of view. Before I started my public speaking business, I worked as the manager in West Australia's organ donation service, and I used to recruit highly qualified intensive care nurses to become donor coordinators. Their role was to go and speak to families and discuss organ and tissue donation for transplantation at the worst time you could ever speak to a family. So they've just learnt of the death of a loved one, and these intensive care nurses that are trained as donor coordinators go and have those discussions. About 70% of Australians support organ donation for transplantation, and about 30% don't support organ donation. It doesn't sit with their values, their culture, their religion, or they just think it's barbaric, shouldn't happen. It would be impossible for someone to have an honest discussion about organ donation if you, as an intensive care nurse yourself, thought that organ donation was barbaric, which you're entitled to do. So your absolute conviction in your message is important. So when you roll out this HR policy, when you're giving this information to a group of students, the first sale, you are a salesperson, you're selling knowledge, information, change to the audience you're speaking to. You've got to buy the change yourself. First sale is to yourself. And you need to be congruent. So who you are on stage is who you are off stage. You know, the financial planner who talks about only buying appreciating assets, invest in shares and property and bonds and cash investments. New cars are a really bad investment because they depreciate. Borrowing money to invest in a depreciating asset is really silly, and as they drive up in a $250,000 Mercedes, it's not congruent with their own message. So they believe 100%. Are you congruent with your messages, or are you just going through the rhetoric because it's work? Just pause for a moment. For the people on the webinar, what do you speak about, and do you have 100% conviction in your message? What are some of the messages you have to speak at work, to your clients, and are you 100% in line? Does anyone work within the disability sector? You really need to be aligned with disability. Any comments? Are you all aligned with your message? Please, really important. If you want to have the impact and you want people to come with you on a journey, you need to be aligned. And the bonus tip. Great speakers, successful speakers, they have a clear outcome in mind. They know what their goal is. They know what the end game is. To the right, you will see some words. Whoops, let me bring that back up. Don't do the scattergun technique. So you say lots of stuff and hope something sticks, or the hit or miss approach. You can see the little guy, he's your audience member. He doesn't know what message to take. And there's that story from Alice in Wonderland when she comes to crossroads and doesn't know whether to go right or doesn't know whether to go left. Fortunately for Alice, there's the Cheshire Cat sitting up in the tree. So Alice says to the Cheshire Cat, which way should I go? And the Cheshire Cat says, well, where do you want to go? And Alice replies, I don't know. And the Cheshire Cat's response is, therefore, it matters not much which path you take. And if you don't know where you want your audience to go, any path will get them there. So what's your clarity of purpose? What's the clear outcomes? What do you want the audience to do next? Make your message unequivocal so that if I bump into you and I'm one of your audience members in 6 months' time and I come up to you and I say, wow, I loved your presentation. I loved, what one thing do you want me to remember and say? This is your clarity of purpose. So that's kind of the bonus tip along with the other 6. So just in summary, great speakers do lots of preparation. Yeah, and thanks, Anne. I think the audience often appreciate the speaker spelling out the take-home messages. Yeah, and I'm going to write some Facebook posts on different ways of ending your presentation. You know you've got to nail your ending. The last 30 seconds matters. It's called the rule of recency. So apparently I'm wrapping up now, the last few seconds you remember. One of the ways of wrapping up is having that call to action and reiterating what your core message is. And a lot of speakers give lots of information, then they stop speaking, and it's kind of, we get to pick whatever message we want. And so you go away, instead of getting a united change or a united front from the audience, you get people doing different things and interpreting what you've said in their own way. They speak without notes, doesn't mean you don't have notes. Put the audience first. This is not about you. It's about the people in the room that need your help, need your message, need your solutions. They move away from barriers. They stand in the middle of the room and have that heart-to-heart one-on-one. They're passionate. They want to be there. They're excited to be there. And they believe in their own message. And of course, that clarity of purpose. What do you want to happen after you speak? Why are you speaking to this audience? Thanks, Anne. Thanks for those remarks. Any last questions as we start to wrap up? As you're typing in any last questions, next webinar I did mention Monday the 9th, and this is targeting your content even further. So how do you make your message stick? Or how do you be more influential and persuade people, especially when you're talking on a contentious issue, or you want people to change what is the normal mode of operating, the status quo? How to be more influential and have sticky messages. Short half-hour webinar on Monday the 9th. No more workshops this year, but I'd really appreciate your assistance in sharing some of the workshops for your locations. I know I've got some Queenslanders on the room, some Victorians, a couple of West Australians. I have got a Queensland workshop in February. It's not on this list, so please share that. Tassie, bring me to Tassie, Anne. I'd love to go to Tasmania. All I need is, so when we do new areas, I just need some people on the ground that can say, hey, here's some networks. You need to contact, so Tasmanian Small Business Association or the Tasmanian Collective for Disability Services. I just don't know how to get to Tasmania as yet. I'm coming to Melbourne, so it's a hop, skip and jump across the ditch to Tasmania. Love to come to Tasmania and do some workshops. And we've got Tasmania on the webinar, of course. Any final questions? Any last comments? Which 1, 2 of those traits that successful speakers do can you do? Is it around your attitude? Is it around clarity of your purpose? Do you need to do a little bit more preparation so you're culturally appropriate, or you've got those difficult, contentious questions kind of prepared? Are you going to take the risk and get away from the lectern? Pick 1 or 2 things that you can do the next time that you don't currently do, and that will elevate you in terms of how the audience sees you, in terms of confidence, effectiveness, and the impact you have.